Now we come to one of the things that put me on this, that actually put me on this course. I mentioned that a few things had happened in order to bring me back to this subject, but this was actually something that was pointed out to me by somebody in the comment section. If they're watching, they know who they are. Um, and they made reference to one U.S. Senator, Nancy Schaefer. It was a comment on my video of, was Chris Cornell a whistleblower? And this was talking about if Chris Cornell and Chester Bennington were about to blow a whistle on a music industry pedophile ring before they both wound up dead in the exact same way. And they were also happen to be very good friends, both victims of child molestation. So anyway, this person in the comment section made a reference to a Senator Nancy Schaefer. I was actually unfamiliar with this senator at the time. But then it led me down a path where I realized everybody who speaks out against this ends up dead. Because Nancy Schaefer was murdered in her home. Nancy Schaefer published a report called The Corrupt Business of Child Protection. This one was targeting child protective services and all of their subgroups about the damage they've done to the family. It is alleged that this report is what lost her seat on the Senate as the representative from Georgia, I believe. The representative from Georgia, I'm pretty sure. But she lost her seat on the Senate. And then on March 6, 2010, her and her husband, Bruce, were found murdered in their home. It was initially labeled a murder-suicide, that her husband had murdered her and then turned the gun on himself. But this is a very fishy argument. One reason specifically is because Nancy Schaefer had been receiving death threats ever since she had published this report, the Corrupt Business of Child Protection report. She'd received death threats, and then she winds up dead. It doesn't seem like much of a coincidence. Another reason why this is a fishy reason is because there's no indication as to why Bruce would do this. There was no indication that they were having marital problems. He wasn't having problems at work as far as we know. He wasn't under extreme stress. It was as if one day he just, out of the blue, decided to pick up a gun and murder himself and his wife. No history of depression as we can tell. And there are rumors that when she was murdered, Nancy Schaefer was putting together an expose on child protective service and was looking to get it abolished. Then she was murdered in her home. Her report was shocking, to say the least. The stories that she told were unbelievable that it was allowed to happen. She told a story of one young mother who had her children taken away, and out of desperation she was told that the only way she'd be able to see her children again was if she signed away her rights to her children and allowed Child Protective Service to take them. So out of fear, she did this. They also told her that the kids would be put in a good home somewhere close she can visit, blah blah blah. Her kids got moved to a completely different county. When her children were placed in foster care, it turned out that the foster parents were wrongly told that they were allowed to adopt this child, while the mother's being told there's a possibility that she could get her kids back one day. So already we're having problems because neither side can determine who's going to be the new permanent parents. But eventually the mother goes to court over this, and it turns out that this foster family has 18 other foster children living with them at any one time. And the foster mother, was involved in a sexual relationship with the caseworker. Talk about everybody working against the mother. So when the judge hears this, the judge, acting all shocked, orders that the kids be removed from the foster parents and returned to the mother. You would think this would be done almost immediately. Nah, the mother had to wait a long time before this happened. The kids were eventually reunited with their grandmother. Within a few days of being reunited with the grandmother, for no reason, the judge from this case decides that the children are now going to be moved to stay with their father, who is across the country and has shown zero interest in being in this kid's life before. The father worked in the adult entertainment industry, his girlfriend was an escort, and his brother had sexual harassment charges placed against him. After keeping the kids out there for a while, the father moves back to where the kids originated from and strikes up a very odd relationship with the foster parents that those kids stayed with for a while. And it turned out that the foster parents would start coming over and visiting and picking up the kids and taking them out. And eventually, one day, the oldest child admits to her grandmother over the telephone that the foster father molested her. This went down in 2002. By the time this report, the Nancy Schaefer report, was put together in 2007, the mother, the grandparents, and the children still had not been reunited 5 years later. When clearly that the mother and the grandmother were the better choice of parents among all the options. Schaefer's report was damning in that it blew the doors wide open as to what was really going on behind the scenes of CPS. In her report, she says the Department of Child Protective Services, known as the Department of Family and Children's Services, DFCS, in Georgia and other titles in other states, has become a protected empire built on taking children and separating family. This is not to say that there is not those children who do need to be removed from wretched situations and need protection. This report is concerned with the children and parents caught up in legal kidnapping, ineffective policies, and DFCS who does not remove a child or children when a child is enduring a torment and abuse. In one county in my district, I arranged a meeting for 37 families to speak freely and without fear. These poor parents and grandparents spoke of their painful, heart-wrenching encounters with DFCS. Their suffering was overwhelming. They wept and cried. Some did not know where their children were and had not seen them in years. I had witnessed the Gestapo at work, and I witnessed the deceitful condition under which children were taken in the middle of the night, out of hospitals, off the school buses, and out of homes. In one county, a private drug testing business was operating with the DFCS department that required many, many drug tests from parents and individuals for profit. In another county, children were not removed when they were enduring the worst possible abuse. Due to being exposed, several employees in a particular DFCS office were fired. However, they have since been rehired either in neighboring counties or in the same county again. According to the calls I am now receiving, the conditions in the county are returning to the same practices that they have been before the light was shown on their deeds. Having worked with the probably 300 cases statewide, I am convinced there is no responsibility and no accountability. The problem is because a number of state employees, their jobs rely on the fact that kids are being taken out of their homes. These are lawyer, court personnel, judges, caseworkers, psychiatrists. These are all the people that benefit from this. Their jobs are tied in for how many kids are actually coming to see them, how many kids are being taken out of their home. The problem really ramped up when Bill Clinton released his Adoption and Safe Families Act. And what this act is, it gave monetary compensations to CPS firms that removed kids from families and placed them into foster homes. The money would then be seen by the department when the child was adopted out of foster care. Some counties would give up to $4,000 per child, and if the child was a special needs child, you could get upwards of $2,000 more dollars. So we're talking $6,000 for one child. This has essentially created a business model for Child Protective Service, giving them a reason to remove children from parents and wreck families, because they are getting quite a nice set of dough out of that, aren't they? And a great quote by Senator Schaefer during her report is that the money keeps flowing as long as the child is out of the home. And that really seems to be the business model of CPS. She also said that there was no financial resources and no real drive to unite the family. And it's true, there's no profit in them for getting the family together, but there's profit in them breaking the family apart. And some of the requirements for parents to see their children again are ridiculous. Some are forced to go on medication. Some have been told they have to divorce their spouse. And the spouse could have not done anything. It's not like the spouse is an abusive one. But because they're labeled as the problem for one reason or the other, wives will have to divorce their husbands in order to see their kids again. Of course, this is just leading to lots of families that, in turn, are divorcing, but the husband and wife just live together and continue their relationship, but just on the record, they're divorced. But that's ridiculous. Unless they were actually like a molester or an abuser, there's no reason for you to say something like that. But you shouldn't be able to deny the mother, regardless, to be able to see your kids just because she's with somebody. Seeing your kids is different from having ownership of your kids. But they're not even willing to let the parents see their kids. Schaefer ends her report by saying, "On my desk are scores of cases of exhausted families and troubled children. It has been beyond me to turn my back on these suffering, crying, and sometimes beaten down individuals. We are mistreating the most innocent. Child Protective Service has become adult-centered to the detriment of children. No longer is judgment based on what the child needs or who the child wants to be with or what is really best for the whole family. It is now an adult or a bureaucrat who makes the decision, based often on just hearsay, without ever consulting a family member, or just what is convenient, profitable, or less troublesome for a director of DFCS. I have witnessed such injustice and harm brought to these families that I am not sure if I even believe reform of the system is possible. The system cannot be trusted. It does not serve the people. It obliterates families and children simply because it has the power to do so. Children deserve better. Families deserve better. It is time to pull back the curtain and set our children and families free." Almost everything that Nancy Schaefer said in her report seems to be corroborated by another article. And this article was an interview between an ex-Child Protective Service agent. His name was Carlos Morales, and he ended up writing a book called Legally Kidnap, A Case Against CPS. In this article, he ends up saying, "I'm guilty of working for CPS. Within CPS, I did not help children. I hurt. I did not protect families. I helped ruin them. I did not work to benefit society. Instead, I helped imprison it. Child Protective Service is an agency which damages and controls society from within by allowing the state to take over the lives of children. As family judge Brian Lindsay put, there is no system ever devised by mankind that is guaranteed to rip husband and wife or father, mother, and child apart so bitterly than our present family court system. We need to abolish Child Protective Service immediately," Morales says. Standing in an office while two kids beg me to go back to their home, I begin retreating back into my inner child. I imagine how I would have felt if I was 7 years old and a Child Protective Service investigator told me I couldn't stay with my mom anymore. Their mother had committed the crime of respecting her child's desire to play outside. Paperwork has already been checked by the supervisor, the judge had backed it, and now I had to find a placement. I put them in my car and we drive. The tears continue, my guilt is overwhelming, and I grant them over to a temporary shelter. 2 court proceedings, tens of thousands of dollars out of the mother's pocket, and 5 bottles of ADHD medication for the kids later. The mom is given back her children. All because she let them play outside. When you see the tears of children begging for their mother, when you see children drugged because the government gives incentives for doing so, and when children die in part because of your actions as a CPS drone, you stop believing in reform. I fell for political hope. I had faith I could be the good guy working for the state, that I would be different. We all imagine that we'll be the hero in our story, but I was not. My faith is gone, and reason has replaced it. The state is a religion, and the political reformers are keeping the faith strong. The only way out is complete abolition. There are currently an estimated 400,000 children under CPS care. And of those 400,000 children, 80% of them weren't taken because of sexual abuse or because of physical abuse. No, 80% were taken because of neglect. While there are many very real life consequences to neglecting a child, it is clear that CPS is not really talking about any of these issues when they discuss neglect. Neglect can mean your child playing outside. Neglect can mean your child is too fat. And in fact, in 40% of the cases, the child is taken away because the parent is smoking pot. They take these children for these reasons, and they put them into a system which will guarantee them about 7 to 8 times more likely they will be abused. They're 3 times more likely than the average child to be put on medical drugs. They are 6 times more likely to die in an abusive home, and half of them will be homeless by the age of 18. These are the results of CPS. Going back to this article, it says, in training, we were told how to tell if people are lying by checking which direction they are looking when they speak. Debunked. The unfailing validity of eyewitness testimony. Debunked. And how the world is more dangerous for children than ever. Debunked. Perhaps CPS's biggest problem is the evidentiary standard. CPS cases can be based on something that happens years ago and not even something that a witness saw firsthand. The agency uses evidence that is based on memory of a story that a witness overheard years ago. How's that for reliability? The investigator is actually told not to record the information taken during interviews word for word. Instead, they're instructed to take notes and to use their judgment in entering the notes into a database in narrative form. In other words, the investigator creates a story based on their own memory of another person's memory, which person may not have even seen the alleged abuse. Fantastic. This third or even fourth-hand story is considered evidence strong enough for life-altering legal action. All of this is done despite an array of information documenting CPS's extreme faultiness, yet CPS remains a massive budget subsidized by the very parents they terrorize. In Nancy Schaefer's report, she ended up stating that social workers are the glue that holds this whole system together. When she talks about this social worker, I believe she's more specifying the caseworkers. Because the thing about a caseworker is a caseworker may or may not be a social worker. But these are the people that are investigating you and takes down the information that will eventually be decided whether your children are taken away from you or not. But the way a caseworker goes about stuff is shady in and of itself. Because caseworkers come in and they will act as your friend. They will be friendly to you, polite, the whole bit, the whole 9 yards. They are only acting this way because the point is to get the parents to trust them and give them as much information as possible. But the caseworker is there to build a case against the parent. They view the parent as the adversary, and their job tells them to do this. They're practically trained manipulators, and to top it all off, they have a much greater advantage in court than the average parent, because most parents probably have not been to court before, don't know how it works, but the caseworker's been there many times for this. They're an expert in this situation. And the parent may be stuck with a simple court-appointed attorney. And there have been plenty of evidence in the past that these court-appointed attorneys, not even just for cases like this, but in many cases, are shit at their jobs, and the only real reason they're there is to guide you through the process, not really there to defend you. You need a lawyer because the law tells you so. So they'll assign you just whoever, somebody you can just get you by. But it seems in cases that involve CPS, these are exactly the type of court-appointed attorneys that people are getting. Many of people have reported that their attorney was fucking useless in the whole situation. Their entire job relies on children in need of service. And because of this, there's nothing to stop them from turning on just any parent if for some reason it's decided that the department needs more funds. More children means more funds. So even if the parent hasn't done anything wrong, there's nothing, absolutely nothing stopping them from turning on you for monetary gain. And if you think about it, it is in CPS's and caseworkers' best interest to widen the term abuse and neglect as much as possible. This allows them possibility of taking many more kids away over simple things, such as playing outside, or your child's too fat. But getting back on track, Nancy Schaefer is not the only person who has spoken out against pedophile rings and has ended up dead. Now, granted that she was murdered I think almost 3 years after she published her report, but if it was true that she was also making an expose on CPS, then it is quite possible that they did murder her for very obvious reasons. Another such person was Bulick Forsyth. He was a manager in the housing department in the UK, and many people, including his family, seem to believe that he was murdered because he was about to blow the whistle on a pedophile wing in their child protection services. This happened in the 1990s, and what the allegations were that the Lambeth Borough officials were using council premises in order to rape women and underage children. It was reported that one of these members watched bestiality and pedophilic porn, and it is also reported that one female staff member, was raped on premises. And if it gets as disgusting as it says, some victims have reported being raped alongside children and animals. I don't know whether this is true, but if it is absolutely disgusting. This allegation involves senior council members, yet the worst that ended up happening is that a few council members lost their jobs. They were fired. That was it. If these allegations were even remotely true, then a full-blown investigation should have been done into this. But for some reason it gets covered up, and for some reason Bulick Forsyth ends up murdered. Some of these accusations, though, are undeniable that there are actual pedophile rings. A good example of this was a scandal in UK Parliament. An investigation was launched into the former Prime Minister of Great Britain. It was called Operation Conifer, and it was that this former Prime Minister raped dozens of children in his time in office. Sir Edward Heath was Prime Minister from 1970 through 1974. During this time, these are when the allegations are said that he raped these dozens of children. It is also said that the establishment knew about it and willingly covered it up. There have been more than 30 accusations against the former Prime Minister. And it was reported by the Wiltshire Police Chief Mike Vale. He stated that these allegations were 120% true. That's a pretty damn good number if you ask me. As I stated that the establishment knew, that's because these crimes were reported to police years ago, decades ago, and they covered it up. Another good example is Liz McKeon. This one is a little more sketchy though, as in that whether murder actually took place or not, but I thought that this is at least worth pointing out. She worked at the BBC at the time, and she did a report on Jimmy Savile, who was a radio DJ, well known at the time. After he died, there were a number of allegations that came out from people that alleged that when they were underage, Jimmy Savile had molested them. Liz McKeon was the journalist who broke this story. The BBC scrapped this story due to pressure from senior management, more specifically George Entwistle. After this happened, McKeon stayed on for a little bit longer, but she eventually quit the BBC in 2013. And she died later on from complications with a stroke. Maybe this is true and it was just complications with a stroke, but I know there are ways to make one death look like another way as a form of assassination. I'm just spitballing right now. I have absolutely no evidence to back this up, but as I'm stating, many people who look into this seem to end up dead under suspicious circumstances. But Jill Dando is another one who ended up dead while looking into the pedophile rings. She too used to work for the BBC, and in 1997, she tried to expose a pedophile ring to her bosses, and the story got scrapped. 2 years later, she was shot dead on her front steps to her house. This happened on April 26, 1999. Her case to this day remains unsolved. Before she died, however, she passed a file to senior management members, and in this, she pointed out Jimmy Savile was one of the pedophiles that she had identified. This story got squashed too. So the BBC was already aware of this, and they covered up the story. If they found out about it more than 10 years beforehand, and then when this story was brought up again by another journalist in the future, they squashed it again. Both of their journalists ended up dead. One complication of a stroke, one was shot dead. Coincidence? That brings us to Bill Bowen. Bill Bowen was the man who made the documentary that I also ended up watching, which is called Innocence Destroyed. And I gotta say, in this my entire investigation, I filmed this whole episode over the course of is it Thursday? Yeah, Thursday, October 20th. I filmed it over the course of the day. Some of you may notice throughout the video it may have went from light to dark. That's why. I spent Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday researching this all day. I spent pretty much my whole day. I had nothing to do. My fucking classes are on strike. So I spent the last 3 days researching the hell out of this. I came across some disturbing stuff, some disturbing stories. A few times in this documentary, I just had to stop. I could not believe what some of the things that I heard in this documentary, some of the pictures I saw. I didn't put in any of the autopsy photos in there because they were disturbing as all hell. But this was one documentary, and I've got some clips here that really, really got to me. And not a lot gets to me. Bill Bowen ended up dying on the golf course back in 2010. He died of a heart attack, and as far as everybody knows, there was no foul play suspected. But I would like to point out that this is yet another person who was exposing pedophile rings. This one, in this documentary, he was specifically going after Child Protective Services and all of their sub-departments. But once again, another person exposing pedophilia and child abuse ends up dead. I'm going to save the documentary clips for the very end, because not only is some of it really tough to watch, but I think it is a good way to leave off this episode. But before we get to there, I would like to go over just before I came across the documentary and watched it, there was an article where this guy Bill Bowen was discussing what was the point of this documentary, how he got into doing this. So I just want to read at least a little bit of that article first. So this was written, I believe, 2009, maybe 2010, just before the documentary came out, and a little bit before he died. But anyway, he says, 4 years ago, I was approached by a father who was in the process of losing his children through a termination of parental rights case against him, brought by the Department of Human Services in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Oh, that's what it is, Oregon. He told me that the official certified transcript of his hearing had been altered to reflect admissions he had never made and evidence and testimony never given. I honestly did not believe him, but agreed to look into the matter a little bit. What I found was like reading a horror story, the worst one I had ever read. His certified transcript had been changed from the original audio recordings made in the courtroom. This is something he makes reference to in the clips that I show. Not one of the well over 1,000 alterations in the transcript favored the parents. The changes were made only favored CPS, and those transcripts had been sent to the Court of Appeals in Salem, Oregon, by the father's indigent court-appointed attorney. I took my findings and a lot of evidence to the attorney who refused to address it with the appeals court. Somehow, when the appeals court found out, they gave the attorney 4 extra months to get and present the evidence, but cautioned that they only wanted to hear about the altered transcript and no other issue. The attorney argued everything under the sun weekly when he submitted his new brief, except for the altered transcript, and the court said that they had no choice but to refuse to overturn the lower court. It turns out the Office of Public Defender Services has a general counsel. His secretary has some relatives that wanted to adopt some blonde-haired, blue-eyed children, and his father kids were that and extremely beautiful. Those 3 children were given to the family of the secretary and the judge, Roxanne Osborne by name, allowed them to be adopted before the appeals court ruled. The state then argued that it was too late and so sorry that the couple lost their 3 children. By the way, the crime the father had been charged with drinking 2 beers after he had been told that he was off probation, and it was admitted that he was told that. Then the probation department revoked the probation and called it threat of harm, and their 3 children were given to the parents who were not even certified or in line to adopt. I was outraged, as was the local senator I took this case to, and DHS CPS thumbed their nose at that senator and just continued on. The stories do not get any better from there. That, as you're going to see inside the clips that I provide for you. I do strongly recommend that everybody watch it because it exposes the horror that is Child Protective Services. But if you don't have a strong stomach, then it would not be a good idea. Not really bringing joy and cheer in my podcast today. I mean, not that I ever really do, but this one was pretty damn dark, wasn't it? But I feel this is information that everybody should be privy to, everybody should be aware of, and information that everybody should share. We need to expose these organizations at all costs. How many children in the past, how many now, and how many in the future will suffer at the hands of these disgusting, perverted people? I personally feel that this would be a mission I would be very happy to take, to expose these pedophiles at every corner, expose their rings, expose their members, expose their hierarchy, shut them down, send them to prison, let them rot there. This is actually something I'd be very happy to fight for and work hard for. So I think every so often in my podcast episodes, I'm going to do another episode on this stuff. Because in my opinion, pedophiles are pedophilia is one of the worst crimes you could possibly do. Murder is always something people are prepared to expose. Well, just about always. Rape? Well, I feel like that is something that is getting more exposed these days, as well as sexual assault. Especially because of the incident with Harvey Weinstein. I was going to cover that, but I didn't end up doing it because this episode ended up turning out real long. And since then, there's been the Me Too, hashtag Me Too. And that was women were saying, would put the hashtag if they have been sexually assaulted or molested. And it exposed the world very much to how many women are really affected by sexual assault. So it's good that that's getting exposed. Some took the hashtag too far in that, and they started hashtagging that all men did it. Not even going to get into that. But I feel like these pedophilia and pedophile rings are one of the last things anyway, that people don't want to talk about, aren't prepared to talk about, and don't want to hear. But it's something that everybody has to hear and know. So I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'm going to leave you now with probably one of the most shocking and damning documentaries ever made, and it was only 25 minutes to a half an hour long. You're not going to see the whole thing here. I'm just showing you the highlighted clips. But I have linked both An Open Secret and Innocence Destroyed in the sources below, so feel free to go and check out the full things. And I strongly recommend that everybody check out Innocence Destroyed. It was damning, it was powerful.
This is Tasha Cram.
I found out that my daughter had been murdered a month after she died.
At the age of 19, she had a baby, and the baby had a thyroidal condition that required a very expensive and specific type of medication. Tasha left Washington State because of an abusive relationship she was in, and she traveled to Oregon in order to try to obtain medical insurance for her child so that she could get that vitally needed medicine. Instead, the state of Oregon, CPS, charged her with medical neglect when she asked for that help and took her child from her. Tasha was told that her daughter would be placed either with the foster parents, who Tasha knew loved the little girl and would take care of her, or with her aunt in Washington State, who had a licensed medical foster home. And Tasha was quite comfortable with that. Instead, unbeknownst to her, the little girl was sent to live with an aunt and uncle of the abusive father in Mexico.
She's got a periorbital, which means around the eyes. That was purposeful. Somebody had hit that. A child to get bruises around the kidneys, somebody had to hit her. On the abdomen, somebody had to hit her. Lacerations to the kidneys, somebody had to hit her. Violent force trauma. It shows no self-defensive wounds, which means, you know, the girl has been used to this for a while, so she just allowed it to occur. Because it was her fault, she would think.
When neighbors felt sympathetic for her and offered her food, one time she was offered soup, which she accepted and ate, and she had both of her hands placed onto a hot stove. Once they were burned, the aunt and uncle then rubbed toothpaste into them to teach her not to take food from people.
Hell she was forced to endure is almost unimaginable.
Well, you got a cerebral palsy child here who looks like she's around 10 or 12 years old. And cerebral palsy kids, which I treat a lot of, they're the happiest freaking kids in the world. Cerebral palsy kids love to hug, love to be touched, love to be kissed. Though you may not want me to say this, I'm going to say it, which is going to sound really nasty coming from a physician speaking to normal people. This looks like roadkill. It looks like even parts of clothing or sheets from the bed are interwoven in this muscle and skin, and the ulcerations are all the way through the skin completely, some of it down to the internal organs, all of them down to the bone. The heels are eroded, the backs of the calves, the buttocks, the coccyx, the tailbone, the lumbar spine, the thoracic spine, all the way up to the cervical spine and the back of the head. And I can't see any muscle integrity at all in this child. The nerves over there are still alive. Feeding her would have been impossible. Cleaning this at this point, say even a month before, this child would not have survived.
Someone needs to speak for Danielle.
There are currently 2 female judges in town who hear most of the DHS cases, and one of the judges has 3 nieces that all work at DHS, one of them being in a supervisory position. As far as I know, I don't think a whole lot of people know that that's exactly what's going on.
We have a judge, Atkinson, who her niece is Chandra Aubrey, and she became a supervisor. 2 of her cousins became caseworkers. And of those cousins, 2 of their friends became caseworkers. Never was any of the clients told that she was related to a good portion of DHS.
We want to know why, even though the murders are caught and put away, how could the child have been put into that home? Especially when there's signs that there's abusive people in that home, people who've been arrested for child abuse or spousal abuse or other violent crimes, and that happens with regularity. What's even more disturbing is when obvious signs have been reported to CPS of child abuse or potential child abuse that are going on, and CPS has failed to take any action or investigate. Even worse is when they place children into a home and then don't visit them for months at a time. You couldn't possibly see the signs of abuse. Or if they receive reports from neighbors and other concerned people and they don't investigate them and the child winds up dead, who's liable? Is it just a murder, or is it CPS as well? But perhaps the most disgusting thing we've ran across is when the CPS caseworker or supervisor turns out to be the abuser of the very children they're placing in these homes. We discovered one judge in Klamath County that actually instructed a CPS worker who was under hot cross-examination by a parent's lawyer that if that CPS worker was uncomfortable answering the questions asked of her by the attorney for the parents, even though she was on the stand and she was under oath, that worker did not have to answer those questions. That's incredible.
Mr. Bowen was able to provide me with the audio transcripts of my court proceeding. There were thousands of errors within my transcript.
I was employed as the Klamath County Human Resources Manager for Klamath County, and I was employed as a court transcriptionist for the State of Oregon Judicial Department. I did learn at some point there were problems with Salmon's transcript.
The Bowens and Senator Whitsitt presented all of that evidence and more to the State Court Administrator, Ms. Kingsley Click. After receiving the information from Senator Whitsitt and the Bowens, a prodigious amount of information, she wrote a letter stating there was nothing wrong with the new transcript.
There was one of them I know, and she just had me write an affidavit and sign it saying that I corrected all the motions in the transcript. When Val Paulson went to her meeting in Salem, she portrayed it that I had read the entire 3,000, 4,000 pages of transcript and corrected every single indiscernible, every single word in that transcript, which I hadn't.
When I went to Mexico after 3 years of not knowing, no closure, because they allowed my daughter to be buried in foreign soil, I went there to see if it was even my kid. But when he tried to get her coffin out, and he kept hitting her against the rocks, the bricks. I told him she'd taken enough abuse in life, and I went in after her, and I handed her out. I finally got a hold of my daughter again. I laid there with her for 5 minutes and asked her to forgive me for trusting the system to do right by her.